Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Hello, welcome back to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Today, our guest is another social worker like me. Her name is Sarah Buffie. Sarah's bio is beautiful and a bit long, so you're going to see me reading it now. Sarah Buffie MSW, LSW, is the founding director of Soul Bird Consulting. This organization believes that nothing has the power to heal like supportive relationships. Sarah specializes in trauma responsive care. She helps organizations and individuals disrupt current models of thinking by building empathy and understanding around the effects of trauma. Sarah has worked in community organizing, specifically asset-based community development, for over a decade and has a deep passion for her work. Sounds like a social worker. Her focus is to spread awareness about how trauma affects the brain and body and teach effective approaches for developing resilience within the people organizations strive to serve and the people closest to the work, caregivers and direct providers. Sarah received her master's in social work from Northern Kentucky University with a self-study focus in Polyvagal Theory, positive psychology, and trauma-sensitive mindfulness practices. With years working closely in her Cincinnati community through her Americorps service, as well as abroad with her Peace Corps service in Namibia, Africa, Sarah brings a unique community building lens to the work. So yes, she's a social worker with community organizing, but has really gone above and beyond to serve, especially these Americorps and Peace Corps, because I know they pay awesome.
Yeah. That's what we do it for.
Yes. Yeah. What a treat to have you on today, Sarah.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Is there anything in your bio that you would like to add or expand upon in your work?
Funny you ask. I'm taking notes. Like, man, I need to update some stuff here. It's been a while. I started Soulbird in 2016, so I have, I think, more learning, I think, under my belt. And I've moved since. I live in Florida now. I was in Ohio for about 15 years, and I'm working more nationally. So yeah, those are some things going on, but still the rest of it speaks to my past. Community and belonging and connection are the main focus of my work. And I guess the other thing I would note, and we might get into that, but I like to help people understand how complex experiences impact, yes, the brain, yes, the body, but also our behavioral patterns. I think we get stuck there with that B word sometimes. And so I like to help unpack and connect some dots. So.
Very cool. So tell me, why become a social worker? Like, what was it for you that helped you make that decision?
It's not a fun story, Karen. I actually, now that you ask me, I was working with folks who had a disability label and doing a lot of connecting work around gifts and passions and interests. And I've always been a listener. I've been empathetic. And I went back to school to get my master's in social work to become a therapist. And specifically social work, because I was talking to my therapist, having my own crisis around I have bad learning retention and I can't do math and school's always been really hard. And she said, Sarah, you don't have to go for the PhD. You can be a social worker or a counselor. Like they're more accessible learning realms. And so it's a little silly to say, but I think I was back then kind of down on myself, kind of a little lower self-esteem around my learning capabilities. And the social work curriculum felt a little bit more accessible. And now, I don't know, a decade later, I'm thinking, man, I wonder if I could have pushed myself differently and stepped into a different lane. But it worked out great. I got through the program and realized pretty quickly I don't want to be a therapist. I really like the group work. I like working with large audiences and really, I think, changing hearts and minds and offering a lens through which we can orient to people and problems different than the one-on-one work that I think is so valuable, but I wasn't having capacity for at the time.
Okay.
I
Yeah, I
haven't
love
shared
my
that story in
social
a
work.
while.
Yeah, I loved my social work curriculum because we don't really have to study math. Like all we had was
Yeah.
statistics. And I didn't like statistics very much either, but
Yeah.
um,
Challenging.
yeah, you could go on and get your doctorate pretty easily.
That's what I hear. I think it was, and I'm reflecting as we're talking, but I think it was my own kind of personal internal struggle. But I'm in a new place now, and I know I have capacity. I know I can. I'm a learner. I'm a curious person. So yeah, that might be on the horizon one day.
Okay, so you have more confidence in your ability to learn at
Yes.
this point. Very
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
I do too. It took
Yeah.
it took a long time, but I do too, for
Hmm.
sure. Okay, so what about your personal life are you open to sharing? Because as you know, my audience is trauma survivors, and one of the way speakers connect is usually by sharing some past trauma, but just share what you're
Mm.
comfortable with.
Yeah. Sure. I've always found my well again a lot of growth over the past several years, but I've always held a little bit of, I think, guilt or self-doubt because I don't have a complex trauma history. When I look through
Mhm.
those ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, I don't mark a single one, and I've always felt some kind of way about that. But as I grow in the field and as I do the work that I do, I think because of my upbringing, I have a really large capacity to hold stories, to be present with people. And as I continue to learn more about some of these traumas that aren't so advertised, right? We know trauma is not an
Right,
event; it's how you experience that event. But I think
right.
the forefront, putting the ACEs at the forefront, kind of tricked the popular scale social folks thinking, oh well, if you don't have these 10 events, then you've never had trauma. So as
Yeah.
I grow, right, as I learn, what I've started to really understand is something that I've overcome is a lot of codependency issues around people pleasing. I think in my role throughout my life unconsciously has been to kind of be the clown, make everything okay, be happy, be hopeful. And what that's done is it's turned into a lot of self-sabotage, a lot of putting other people ahead of myself. And it was
Hmm.
almost as an accolade. I'm such a giver, but it just over time, it just the taking, or what felt like taking, really started to cause distress in my personal relationships, my professional relationships. So that's a lot of healing that I've been doing over several past, I don't know, half a decade or so. And so I think I don't have something to point to specifically, but I'm a recovering codependent is the short story to that.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
mhm.
Yeah. And usually on my show, the guests are trauma survivors or helping professionals in the
Mhm.
field. And a lot of times they're both, but it's not a rule, right?
Mhm.
I don't have to be
Mhm.
an alcoholic to work with alcoholics, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that you're able to hold stories and people feel
Mhm.
heard when they're with you is huge.
Mhm.
That's the most
Yeah.
important thing.
Yeah. I think it a lot stems from how I was poured into. I came out as a lesbian when I was 18, I think, in first year in college. And I went to a university that I was an 80s kid. So I didn't have models of LGBTQ folks around. When I came out, I felt like I was the only gay person besides my girlfriend on the campus.
In the
I
world,
was
in the
yeah,
world.
on the whole world, definitely, that came with depression, stint with, I say a stint because I didn't suffer like a lot of folks, but around bulimia kind of as a coping mechanism. And it was awful. It was a very, very challenging year, and I think colored my experience at sometimes, at my university. I got through that. I healed. I came out on the other end, and I had a lot of support from my family and then friends. And then as I came out, it was like people started coming out of the woodwork. We're all
Right.
around. But the way I was poured into from my family and friends during that time of distress, I think just, really impacted how I'm able to show up for folks. So I have a thread that I can tug on anytime that allows me to be a helper, allows me to show up for people in a whole and full way.
I'm really happy to hear that because a lot of times that's not what people experience. And it can be
Yeah.
traumatic itself when your family disowns you, rejects
Hmm.
you. So that was
Hmm.
not your experience, it sounds like.
No, and again, put me on the other side of I didn't connect with all my gay brothers and sisters who did have the challenging experience. My dad became a huge advocate in the medical community, working to
Wow.
change, created the legislation for the Indiana medical Association to come out in support of gay rights. My mom is an incredible advocate, joined PFLAG and spoke at universities. My sister got a tattoo. My other sister was
Oh,
actually
wow.
Miss New York, and her platform was Straight for Equality. It was all about gay rights, and it was the first person in the pageant history who ever had an LGBTQ platform. So yeah, I have the complete opposite. My brother is such a
Wow.
bud about it. So so lucky, privileged in that sense, and grateful. But again, I
Yeah.
think it helps me really big heart,
Mhm.
big arms for those I support.
That was very beautiful, I just have to
Yeah,
say.
had to
So,
brag on my fam for a minute.
can they do something about transgender rights now? Because that's been an issue.
So yeah, my dad hosted a conference, a medical conference about transgender rights and health, and so yeah, it's such an awful. It's awful what's happening now politically, and especially even being down in Florida. I'm from Indiana, and of course, Indiana's adopting these disgusting laws that are being passed. So yeah, it's a real tragic time we're in right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's transition. I don't have a great segue, unfortunately. Maybe you
That's
can
all
come up
right.
with one. I think a lot of people listening, maybe half will know about polyvagal theory, and other
Mm.
people are going to be like, "What the hell is that?" And I was
Mm-hmm,
wondering
mm-hmm.
if you had a really good definition of that, since that's part of the work you do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can speak more to the what the hell is that, folks, because I like to talk about it real layman's terms. So you're people who really know, be like, so I say self-study in my bio because I didn't have any exposure to polyvagal theory, to nervous system work, to really trauma. I brought in my mentor to be a guest speaker at my second year because I'm like, why aren't we talking about trauma? So I say self-study because I was just hungry for more information
Mhm.
beyond behaviorism. So polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges created this theory, right? And poly meaning many, vagal is connecting to the vagus nerve. So we've got this wandering nerve that's connected to the base of our brainstem, and it goes up into our face, around our eyes and ears and mouth, and goes down through our vocal cords, our heart, our lungs, all the way down to our colon. And it's the information superhighway between the brain and body. And what I'm understanding from the theory is that there's bidirectional information, meaning there's information flowing between brain and body. 80 to 90% of information that flows is coming from the body to the brain. And the vagus nerve, right, especially down in your gut, is what's reading the room before you have access to emotional awareness, thoughts, right, conscious thought. And so if your gut system perceives threat in the environment, internally or relationally, it'll activate to get you into that fight or flight or freeze mode. So all for our survival, for protection, connection, or defense. When the threat is gone away, if you do not have really complex trauma or you have traumatic experiences, your vagus nerve is toned in a way that when the threat goes, it'll ground, regulate, kind of come back to the, help all your rhythms, your breathing and your blood pressure, etc. Unfortunately, folks who have trauma histories, that vagus nerve is overactive. It's activating into fight or flight or freeze with both perceived and real threat. It can happen over a memory, a sight, sound, smell can activate that activation. And so the vagus nerve gets kind of a low tone, which means it's not activating and deactivating in a way that's helpful and unconscious. It's really staying in that high alert, which then leads to dis-ease, a lot of body-based illnesses, inflammation, etc. So to go on, I guess, a little bit more with our understanding of polyvagal theory, we understand that our behavioral expressions are actually giving us clues onto what's happening inside. And so that's why I like to focus on this as a theory beyond behaviorism, because I work with educators, families, and human service professionals who are maybe brought up from that lens, but haven't evolved past it. And so we only focus on what's observable. And then I watch kids, young people, adults get blamed and shamed for their survival strategies.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes behavioral approaches, if the problem isn't behavioral approaches can just lead to more re-traumatization. So when we can understand the vagus nerve, we can learn how to tone it. We can learn how to lift the blame and shame off of folks and help work more on from the inside versus just what's observable from our behavioral patterns.
You did a kick-ass job
Thank
describing
you.
that. Yeah. 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 I always tell my clients, especially parenting's like struggling with parenting, and it's like there's a reason behind behaviors. Let's look at, instead of looking at the behavior, let's look at what the reasons could be.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
exploring that. Yeah.
Hmm.
All right. And so with your understanding of polyvagal, how does your mindfulness work and practice impact that or help it?
Yeah. So, just on a very simple level, when we bring intentional attention to our breathing, right? When I pay
Mhm.
attention to my breathing, that helps that's my vagus nerve is connected there, and I can activate that rest and digest part of my system by dropping my breathing from my chest down into my belly. So breathing is one of the most, I guess, talked about or accessible ways to talk about mindfulness, right? Just paying attention back to our breath. We know, though, people who've experienced trauma or on that survival journey, paying attention inward or going back to the breath can be really activating, does not feel safe. So paying attention to our external environment can be a little bit more accessible. And so how I understand the two in my practice is when I'm supporting people around different mindfulness practices or on that journey, I always offer that modification. And if I see people tense up or shut down or have a big no, I really embrace that because I'm seeing their vagus nerve on fire, right? I mean, maybe their face is smiling, but I can see that something inside is signaling this isn't a safe experience. So my colleague, Karen Michelle Pearson, and I developed a 6-week offering for families in Ohio, families who have a loved one with a developmental disability. It's a trauma-sensitive mindfulness program. And the first couple sessions really unpack nervous system awareness, our brain-based awareness. We look at the window of tolerance. So it's not maybe a traditional trauma sensitive mindfulness course in that regard, but because of my passion and awareness and almost like professional plead to get us beyond this observable lens, I kind of sprinkle that in any offering or training that I do.
Awesome. And I want to hear about those, but you mentioned the windows of tolerance. And again, it's one of those things where some people listening will understand what that is and some may not.
Yeah,
Do you feel comfortable kind of describing that in a nutshell?
Sure. So again, how I'm understanding that is we have this, I think this is Dan Siegel, if people Google Dan Siegel, we
Yeah.
have, right, I think. There's also a book called Widen the Window by Elizabeth Stanley. And that's a big old honky, it's huge. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's a summer reading, or toilet reading, but there's some
Good,
cool
because I
stuff
haven't
in
read
there.
that.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. But so the window of tolerance is basically that experience, that nervous system experience where we can navigate stress from more of a regulated state, or we have more flexibility to navigate hardship. So there's this notion of you and I might be within our window of tolerance right now. I'm sweating, right? This is I'm kind of on the spot, but I'm not into hyper arousal, that fight or flight. I'm also not in hypo arousal where it's that shutdown. Both hyper and hypo, those are survival strategies. It's not good or bad, right or wrong, right? These are ways our nervous systems will activate for us on behalf of our needs. But staying within that window of tolerance, it helps you communicate clearly, engage, have more focus. And then when stressful things happen, if you're in your window of tolerance, you can activate some energy to mobilize, but you're not chaotic, right? You're able to focus and have purposeful energy. If you've had a trauma history, if you experience a lot of toxic stress, a lot of distress, too much, too fast, too soon, or not enough for too long, that window of tolerance can get smaller and smaller. So you might even have, in other words, have a low frustration tolerance, where seemingly small things, maybe to a shared reality, can activate you into fight or flight or to freeze. Different than if you start to do some more vagus nerve exercises or mindfulness or a lot of healing journey. When you have a wider window, some of those things might be more accessible and not shoot you off into your survival strategies. I don't know if folks can see me. I've got my hands going all over the place. But
well, the YouTubers were.
Oh, good. 93% of communication is nonverbal, and I think it's like 99 for me. But yeah, so that window of tolerance is our capacity to engage, be present, etc. What would you add to that, Karen? Because I'm sure that you know about that, but what am I missing?
Well, I don't know if you're missing anything. I think something I would add is a lot of times when you have therapy, if your window of tolerance is narrow because you are easily activated, one of the goals of therapy is just widening that window over time, and it's learning how to practice being within your window. No, but I think you did a really good job. And for those of you listening on podcasts, you may want to jump over to YouTube if you want to see Sarah's hand motions. It may help. I'm not sure.
Very active.
Okay, so you mentioned I'm a big bibliotherapy girl.
Okay.
And what was the book that the fat non-summer reading?
Yes, Widening the Window. I'm looking for it on my shelf. Can't find it at the moment. By Elizabeth Stanley.
Okay, I have heard of her. Yeah.
Cool.
When you first said, I didn't recognize it. And do you remember which one of Dan Siegel's book was about the windows of tolerance? I can't remember right now.
I have no idea. And I don't even know if he wrote a whole book on it, but I think that's maybe where I first heard the language. Yeah.
Me too. Mm-hmm. All right. I'll Google that later.
Cool.
Okay. And so do you have other favorite books that helped you with your learning about, what's your favorite trauma recovery or trauma related books?
Oh gosh. So now I'm turning my back, but you can still hear me. There's so many. Okay, so of course the body keeps a score, which was where you and I met on the panel. And I say of course because it really felt like the first popular book that got on the radar to help lay people understand how trauma is not a bad memory, it's a body memory. And that, even just that line. So a lot of my work, I talk about these 5 core convictions, and we can get in or not get into that. But the first one is trauma is stored in the body. And I call them convictions because I'm so convicted on these truths that they've completely changed the stories I tell about people. They've changed how I hear stories, crisis, challenge, and they've ultimately impacted what I do and how I behave with other people. And so just this title of that book and that sentence, I feel like if we can understand that trauma is not a bad memory, it's a body memory, it changes the course of our social work field, our mental health field, et cetera. So definitely that. But I also want to highlight this book. Ruth Myers is a psychiatrist. Her husband, Stephen, is a BCBA, and they wrote this delicious book. Kind of a funky cover here. It's a big title, but I'm going to name it because any of my folks or your folks, any people who work with folks with developmental disabilities, I think we get a lot wrong with treatment, with connection, with help, with safety. I could go on a tangent, but this book is called Individuals with Intellectual Developmental Disabilities and Aggression, Self-Injury, and or Failure to Thrive. And the reason why I'm lifting this book up is because Dr. Myers has a sense of humor and compassion and an active valuation of people with developmental disabilities that counteracts our global devaluation that happens. And I watch people often, I would say every day, but I'm hyperbole, so I'll say monthly, especially with people with disabilities and self-injury, et cetera. These are survival strategies, but they're continually chemically restrained or bluntly suppressed with antipsychotics for behavioral management. And I can feel my vagus nerve speaking to me right now. I can feel my chest tighten. I can feel emotions coming to my face because it's not just cruel, it's unjust. And our physicians, our psychiatrists, they don't know. They don't get it. And they're not accessible. They're not even all the times willing to learn and be confronted. There's a whole chapter on here on how to address a physician whose ego might be driving the treatment plan versus real value of a person with disability. So that's a lot of my study through her. And then I've got a whole shelf over here that I could list them off, but any work from Deb Dana is very helpful. So Stephen Porges, who talks about polyvagal theory, he's for all our science and academic folks, and Deb kind of brings it down to earth a little bit.
Social workers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So.
She's a social worker from Maine, like me. I'm from Maine.
Okay, lovely. Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but you do have to do all the convictions. I'm very curious.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here we go. Yes, I 5 core convictions. 1, trauma stored in the body. 2, regulation is a practice. Right? I discern between coping strategies and regulation. I see kids blamed and shamed for not using their coping strategies, right? Coping requires higher level thinking. So unless we pull these out and engage practice regulating with and alongside a safe other, they're not going to be readily accessible. So regulation really is a practice. The third is both perceived threat and real threat can feel the same in the body. And I think if we're convicted around that, we no longer will scream at young people, what were you thinking? It's like if you're screaming that, they weren't thinking, they weren't reacting. The next is trauma symptoms, our survival strategies. I think when we can get out of the rhetoric of challenging behavior, or even just using, I've watched people just shortcut that. That kid's a behavior kid. Well, what the hell does that mean? We're human beings. We behave, right? We reduce people to the sum of their challenging behaviors. So I like to pull the curtain back and just with that conviction, trauma symptoms are survival strategies. And the last one, healing happens in relationship. Trauma doesn't happen in isolation, neither does healing. They both happen in the context of relationship. So that's kind of my main work right now, is just sharing those 5 things, whether it's in 5 seconds or 5 hours, and helping people wrap their hearts and minds around those, really to drive their planning and strategizing.
So when's the book coming out about that?
It's on this computer. There's a lot of babblings. You know what's so funny? I started to write a book about a year ago, and my first tip was like, well, I'm always speaking and talking. Let me get some transcripts of some of these talks. And because I talk with my hands so much, I'm not saying shit when you just print that stuff out. I'm like, there's nothing here.
That's not true.
It's not true. It didn't track.
It's funny.
So I'm like going through all that and trying to figure out. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to, work on that.
I think that sounds like a book.
Yeah,
it really does. Yeah. So you it'll help you get more exposure for the work you do. You know, because it's great stuff. It's great stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, so let me see what else I want to ask you. I'm going to look over here for a minute. So tell us a bit more about the like, if somebody wanted to work with you more, like what are some of the things that you offer? Like, I know you do community work. Tell us more about what you actually offer for services.
Yeah. So even the community piece, that's where my heart is and my gut is. That's my kind of upbringing and my training. But right now I'm more of a speaker and trainer. And a lot of my work is helping people get on this lens, right? Get convicted around these 5 things. So right now we have at Soulbird, we have trainings, 3-hour and 6-hour. We offer both virtual and in-person experiences. Both experiences are just that. I don't do webinars. I like to be with people and talk with them. So everything's live and we're connected. You know, I have 25 people on my screen at each time, and I'm watching body language and calling people in. We do small groups, right? So that's a big part of the work. I've also got a couple programs that I've partnered with people on. One is the Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness Program. My co-partner and I, Kara, are working to support schools, so educators and the human service professionals and families on practice groups and experiencing what does it mean to be in community with other trauma sensitive folks. And then one of the things I've been working on over the past couple of years, and this is in partnership with a larger body in Ohio, is a biological timeline facilitators cohort. So what that means is Dr. Beth Burrell out of Pennsylvania, also a social worker, she really started to help people. And I think, I don't know this exact story, but she started to realize that we were making interventions and strategies based on, again, symptomology, right? We're planning based on crisis, specifically with folks in the developmental disability world. But to look back at their childhood histories, to unpack 0 to the present day, to look at what has happened, right? Similar to Bruce Perry and Oprah had said, well, what happened? Now what's wrong with you, right? And we're able to understand someone through the lens of their biography. And not only changes our strategies and our supports, but it changes our own capacity for empathy, for creativity, for patience as we work with folks. I learned about her work a long time ago, and then I was fortunate enough to be mentored with a project under Mary Vicario, who deepened a trauma-informed and resilience lens for the biographical timeline. And for 5 seasons now, I wouldn't say years because sometimes they overlap, I've been hosting a cohort on how to train facilitators to carry out this biographical timeline process. So that's really cool. It's mainly in Ohio right now, but we're open to offering that to other places or organizations or states where they haven't been so familiar with the biographical timeline. And then my big thing I've got going on is we are in a digital world. And before COVID, I wasn't on the computer. I was out and about, right? But I really have thrived in this space, and I feel like the learning has been really accessible. And so our digital platform is being or has been launched, depending on when this goes out, where we're offering some self-study work, all paired with live gatherings. So let's be accessible for folks who want to kind of chill and learn on their own, but that comes with live connections, Q&A, and problem solving and discussion groups, so we can engage the human connection around this work. So all of that's at soulbirdconsulting.info, and check it out.
Okay. Yeah, say the web one more time.
Yeah, soulbirdconsulting.info. Yeah, the .com was already taken, so.
Yeah, of course it was, right?
right. Other
you had to have your business. Yeah, you had to have your business all organized early in the web time to get the URL.
They're gone.
Yeah. So is that the best way for most people to reach you if they're interested in working with you? Is that URL?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best. Hopefully our social media and YouTube presence will start to ramp up, but a good old-fashioned email is a great way to go as well.
Okay, share your YouTube if you know it. It'll be in the show notes. I think I have it too.
So I at this point, so I didn't get into this work to be a business person, so I'm still kind of getting all my ducks in a row, but I think it's under my personal name, Sarah Buffie, or you can look at Soulbird Consulting. I'm either they're linked or they're unlinked, or we're going to get them linked, but if you type any of those in the chat, you could find those, or in the search engine.
Yeah, I have youtube.com /@Soulbird Consulting.
Yes. Okay, cool. Then there it is. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And I can't remember if I've gone to that yet, but I will, and I'll subscribe as well.
Yeah, cool.
So very good work. And yeah, it's hard for us social workers. Like I've worked with people my whole career and not online until, late, just the past couple of years I've been online. And it is a big thing because we're so used to giving and teaching and training. We're not thinking, oh, I need to grow my numbers over here. The only reason we need to grow them is so it gets exposure.
Yeah.
We can help more people.
Right.
So please, if you're listening, subscribe to her YouTube channel so her company can grow to help more children and communities. So that's awesome.
Thank you, Karen.
Is there anything else that you would like to add before we wrap up?
I think just a lot of gratitude for you for hosting platforms like this. And I share that resonance that, maybe we're not, shoulder to shoulder with folks right now, but there's still a lot of good connection that can happen here. I know people feel seen and heard through the work that you do just by listening to conversations. So just gratitude and thanks for having me on.
Well, it's been my pleasure. All right, everyone, keep listening, keep watching Heal, Thrive, Dream, where you'll hear stories about trauma recovery and professionals that make the good work happen. Thank you.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.